All of today's speakers will be speaking English, and we will offer simultaneous translation in Japanese throughout this event through the interpretation channel. Now, you can navigate between the interpretation and main channels using the translation button located on the right side of the menu under your Zoom video display. Now, at any time, you may join the Japanese interpretation channel to hear Japanese interpretation, and you may also return to the main session to hear the speaker directly at any time. Please note that this feature may have limited functionality or may not be available if you're joining from your mobile device or if your version of Zoom is not up to date. Also, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, we encourage you to share them in the chat, either in English or in Japanese. We will have some time for Q&A in the later part of the session. And please note that this event is being recorded and that the recording will be made available online at a later date. Finally, through our events, we aim to promote an environment of trust where we can build understanding on complex issues through international, intergenerational, and inclusive dialogue. So we kindly ask that all distinguished presenters and guests respect differences in culture, experience, and perspective, regardless of the topics being discussed. And please note that this event will operate under Chatham House rule, which means that participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers, nor that of any other participant may be revealed. So thank you for your kind attention and understanding on these points. So before I introduce today's panel session, I would like to take this opportunity to share a few remarks about YPFP Tokyo, the organization hosting today's event. YPFP is a global organization that has been working for nearly 20 years to build the next generation of diverse and passionate leaders through career building programs, engaging events with a global community of peers, and opportunities to elevate voices through research, writing, and publication. Tokyo is the newest YPFP branch, connecting people from around the world with those in and interested in Asia. YPFP Tokyo is a member-based organization and accepts new member applications on a rolling basis. So if you are a university student, a young professional, or someone interested in contributing to these groups, we encourage you to visit our website and to learn more about YPFP Tokyo. And we look forward to welcoming you to future events. So for today's event, I am pleased to introduce a truly international panel of youth leaders, social entrepreneurs, and climate activists to share their insights on their lessons learned through their involvement during COP26 and their projections of what multilateral stakeholders, including youth, can do now on the path to COP27. But before I introduce our speakers, let me explain a bit further about the topics of today's event, COP27 and climate change. The 27th session of the Conference of the Parties, better known as COP, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, 3Cs. It is scheduled to take place in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, from the 7th of November to the 18th of November, 2022. The UNFCCC established an international environment treaty to combat dangerous human interference with the climate system, in part by stabilizing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. The COP is the supreme decision-making body of the UNFCCC, and all states that are party to the UNFCCC are represented at the COP, at which they review the implementation of the UNFCCC and any other legal instruments that the COP adopts and makes decisions necessary to promote the effective implementation of the UNFCCC mandate and its legal instruments. While the most recent COP26 in Glasgow began the implementation stage of the Paris Agreement, the road to COP27 is a complex one. Climate change is outpacing multilateralism at an alarming rate, with the most recent International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC report, suggesting that we are on a pathway to global warming of more than double the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that was agreed in Paris in 2015. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has described the latest IPCC report as a litany of broken climate promises and a yawning gap between climate pledges and reality. So more is needed by governments, NGO, and the private sector. And so in order to avert the worst outcomes of the climate crisis, the time to act is now and with great speed. And in this, young people will play a vital role in galvanizing willpower for climate action and ushering in a future that we all want and we all need. This necessitates greater youth agency and decision-making power in climate negotiations and action. So as youth, we inherit the decisions of this next decade of action. And now we should begin to ask ourselves the question, on the road to COP27, what role will youth have in achieving the ultimate goals of the UNFCCC, and how can we best avert the global climate crisis? So with this question in mind, we have asked our panelists to share their experiences and consider the following questions. How would you say we can facilitate greater collaboration between young people from different backgrounds and sectors in order to accelerate climate action? What was your role at COP26 and what were some key takeaways for you? And looking forward to COP27, what do you think governments, private sector entities, NGOs, youth and migrant advocates, and other relevant stakeholders can do to prepare? What are some ways in which climate change has impacted youth mental health and well-being? And how can we best promote better youth mental health and well-being for climate action? What specific examples can you share with us of some initiatives that model the kind of change we want to see in the world today? And what are some challenges in the Asia-Pacific region in addressing climate change? How do you imagine Asia-Pacific's role in addressing climate change? And what would you recommend to policymakers? And our bonus question, we have a lot of young professionals in a range of fields and backgrounds. Where would you recommend them to start to take climate action, and how should they use their skills and expertise? Now, we may be able to answer all of these questions, and if not, that is okay. We'll try to answer as many as we can. Our speakers today are joining us from Nigeria, Germany, and the UK to shed light on these critical issues. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Demiola Hamid Balogun. Dami is a social entrepreneur and climate activist, and he's the co-founder and CEO of the Youth Sustainable Development Network, and had the opportunity to be a part of COP26 in Glasgow in this capacity. Dami, we are so thankful to have you with us today. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Tristan, for the wonderful introduction. I'm also grateful to the YFPP Tokyo for this invite. And I'm looking forward to commencing my statement. Without further ado, with your kind permission, I would just like to share my screen. Is that fine?
Of course, go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
We can see it.
All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, so this is my written statement as requested by the YPFP Tokyo. And then, as you all know, my name is Damilola Hamid Balogun. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Youth Sustainable Development Network. And so today's topic, we're looking at youth leaders and the environment on the road to COP27. And again, just for me to emphasize, I represent the Youth Sustainable Development Network, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation with everyone here. So I'll just start by saying, good day, everyone. I'm very pleased to join you all in today's conversation. First of all, I would like to appreciate the young professionals in foreign policy, Tokyo, for organizing this event at such a critical time like this. I would also like to thank YPFP Tokyo for extending an invitation to me to contribute a volume of my thoughts on today's topic. Finally, to my co-panelists and audience, thank you for finding me worthy in joining today's conversation. With more engagements like this, I am rest assured the future that we want is clearly gravitating towards us. As you are all aware, climate change is one of the most pressing challenges the world faces today. It affects all aspects of development agenda, from poverty eradication to healthcare, and from economic growth to disaster risk reduction. The poorest and the most vulnerable people globally will continue to be most affected if efforts are not put in place to mitigate and adapt to the impact of climate change. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, on the other hand, is a blueprint set by the United Nations in collaboration with all sectors of the society to address pressing problems ranging from the impact of climate change to increased terrorism and insecurity, poor quality education, high rate of unemployment, and more recently, the inequality in COVID-19 vaccine distribution and the disparity in gender. In other words, the blueprint is essentially meant to unlock immense gratitude for humanity. At this junction, it is very, very imperative that I give an overview on the concept of climate change and shed light on the nexus between climate change and the Sustainable Development Goals. So one might want to wonder, what is climate change exactly? Simply put, climate change is a change in the atmosphere. That is the long-term shift in temperature and weather patterns. While it is agreed by scientists that there are various human causes of climate change leading up to the release of greenhouse gases into the air, from burning fossil fuels to deforestation to agriculture and so on, I strongly believe these causes vary from one location to another in accordance to the reality of a particular location. It then comes to mind to address a foundational question in today's address. How would one describe the impact of climate change in achieving the SDGs as a whole? Permit me to move on to the next slide. Awesome. So first of all, it is important to bear in mind that the SDGs are very interconnected. And as such, high synergies amongst these goals are important to eventually leave no one behind by 2030. As I have noticed, some goals have the same indicator or target with other goals. For example, number of persons affected by disaster and number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies are both included as a target in SDG 1, which is no poverty, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, SDG 13, which centers around climate action, which is the basis of today's conversation. This then means that the progress of this target would ultimately benefit all of the three goals aforementioned, therefore creating a synergy in the SDGs. Consequently, if the SDGs are to be achieved by 2030 targets, the risk posed by climate change must be understood and addressed, and vice versa. That is, the challenges and risk affecting climate change must be understood and taken into cognizance into the SDGs, and that of the SDGs must be understood and taken into cognizance when dealing with climate change as a whole. From the above, it is very lucid that climate change aggravates existing vulnerabilities and structural inequalities, which poses a serious threat to achieving the SDGs. My attendance at the 26th edition Conference of Parties, otherwise known as COP26, no doubt gave me a great exposure and insight as to how the issue of climate change is addressed at the high-level space. As a youth observer, I got to witness over 200 member states come together in Glasgow to deliberate and negotiate means of curbing climate change impact, as well as stakeholders to be involved in COP26 goals, from mitigation to adaptation to climate finance and climate collaboration. The key takeaways for me at COP26 includes: one, that many young leaders, especially young women, were given the floor to not only be included in delegations, but also speaking engagements. The immense need to connect, involve, and engage young people, climate activists from across the world, especially those from marginalized communities, as the second takeaway for me. The third takeaway for me was the need to accelerate a climate contingency plan for many small island developing states. The urgent need to face down coal and fossil fuel and move quickly to a green energy, which will in the long term shift the global order, was a key takeaway for me as the fourth point. Looking forward to COP27, which is coming down to Africa, I suggest stakeholders generally and African society stakeholders look in-depthly to the reality of Africa in order to propose workable solutions in addressing the issue of climate change in Africa. It is, of course, a known fact that Africa is the least emitter, but the most affected. And so, in my opinion, a major factor impacting climate change in Africa is socio-economic underdevelopment. And I'll pin this example. For example, in Nigeria, you find out that as a result of high rate of unemployment, certain individuals construct illegal oil refineries to refine and sell oil produce to meet their economic needs, which greatly affects the environment in the long run. On the other hand, looking at the Asia Pacific region, which where most of our audience are tuning in today, Asian Pacific region remains one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change, and projections have shown that impact will even become more intense in coming years. Unlike Africa, Asia Pacific accounts for nearly half of the global greenhouse gas emission, which is very disturbing. And specifically, Japan is in the top 5 of major polluters globally. It is therefore important that Asia Pacific region takes steps to drastically reduce its carbon emissions. As a World Bank report shows, 375 million people could be affected in the next 30 years if action is not taken urgently. The role of Asia Pacific in addressing the impact of climate change from inside out would include the following points. 1, rapid integration of climate change into national, local, and sectorial frameworks and policies. Engagement of key stakeholders in developing and sharing knowledge on the science of climate change and best practices. 3, access to finance. It is also important to emphasize that according to the Climate Action Tracker Map, it reveals that the majority of the Asia Pacific countries fall in the highly insufficient category, which is totally off the global target. According to this same tracker, only Philippines ranks in the compatible category. How do they do this? Probably because of the countries being the most affected by climate change in the Asia Pacific region. Local policies are in place, which is gradually keeping the country in line with a more realistic scenario of limiting global warming. However, it is important that other countries in Asia Pacific region actively take bold steps in addressing the impact of climate change. And according to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, it was noted that Asia's large population, the frequency of natural disasters in the region, and the chaotic process of urbanization are the major factors responsible for the Asia Pacific vulnerability to the risk of climate change. It simply means, to mention a few, that proper urbanization and community development at local level will go a long way in addressing the impact of climate change as far as Asia and the Pacific region is concerned. It permits me to go to my last. So yes, the next discussion we're looking at now is how are we able to synergize all of what we talked about with certain organizations that are taking active role and modeling the change that we eventually want to see in the future that we create. Being the founder and the CEO of the Youth Sustainable Development Network, I'll be using the Youth Sustainable Development Network as a case study. At the Youth Sustainable Development Network, where we work with youth and change makers in instilling essential knowledge of social entrepreneurship and leadership needed to create a more sustainable and a resilient future by 2030 and beyond. It is important to let the audience and my co-panelists and organizers of today's conversation understand some changes that we are driving at the local level. The Youth Sustainable Development Network is deeply concerned about connecting youth with funding and resources to implement their ideas. In a bid to put them at the center of meaningful implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, that is the YSDN launched the solar irrigation project in conjunction with Saving the Earth initiative, having raised $5,000 from our partner, Panther Group, based in Australia, to support farmers to have access to knowledge on irrigation and irrigation management, as well as equipment that can support them to operate all-year production. This was in collaboration with Irritech Nigeria Limited, who installed a solar irrigation kit for 2 farmers in Ekpe community, Lagos, Nigeria. After which the farmers have been able to generate more farm produce in a shorter time and are not dependent on generator, which is in itself not environmentally friendly. The video of this solution will be played right after my speech. The second change that we are modeling at the Youth Sustainable Development Network was the Young Layers for Climate Justice that was held in Lagos. The Young Layers for Climate Justice in Nigeria was a 2-day workshop designed by the International Climate Change Development Initiative and the Youth Sustainable Development Network for Nigerian law students to be educated and sensitized on the role of the legal profession in achieving the net zero agenda. Through this workshop, YSDN was able to bring professionals in the field who sufficiently discussed and disintegrated the climate change and justice sector, enabling them to understand this. This was indeed life transformational for the students, as many of them decided to pick up environmental law as an elective in their school to gain more insights. Finally, fellow youths, I implore you all to imagine a sustainable future and care about it dearly. No doubt, we are part of a story that started long before we can remember and will continue beyond into the future. I sense we are born at a time of important change, and together we need to ensure this change comes out well. I urge you all to begin to effect change in your own little ways so we build a prosperous planet for not only ourselves, but also generations yet unborn. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for that very informative address, Demi. I liked the talk about the nexus between climate change and the SDGs. You shared many important aspects that underpin the challenges of our time, and your reflections gave us hope for a brighter future. Now, as a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in the chat below. Next, we will hear from Ms. Giulia Bonetti. Giulia was appointed to the 2021 McKinsey Next Generation Women's Leaders and has also served as volunteer editor-in-chief under the United Nations Environment Program. Like Demi, Giulia was a COP26 contributor and remains strongly committed to climate issues. We will be sharing Giulia's address with you today as a pre-recorded video. Please give it your attention. Please, just one moment real quick. Oh, please play Dami's video for the introduction for one moment before we move on to Giulia's address.
I'm not sure the audio is picking up from my end.
Here we're standing upon about 3.5 acres of land, having on it tomatoes, cucumber, another section of tomatoes, and behind it, we have a chili pepper. So we'll be running these farms purely on generator all these years. And it's not been easy running on generator because generator consumes a lot of fuel.
The stress, the money involved, at times we don't have money to even buy fuel at times.
About 3,000 naira of fuel every day. So that is amounting to close to 90,000 naira once in a month. My name is founder of Saving the Earth. It's basically an organization that focuses on helping local communities deal with environmental issues. It's also good to know that we are the winner of YSDC History Challenge, which took place in June. And we have been implementing a project from the case study, which is helping farmers deal with irrigation problems. We are SSA Farm here in Ebe, where we are implementing one of the projects to help this farm deal with the problem of water in their farms. Basically, they have been used to using generators to generate water, which has not been effective. So involved high cost of production. We've collaborated with Irritech, which is a company that supplies solar irrigation systems to farmers all over the country.
Hi everyone, my name is Kenneth Okonkwo and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Irritech Nigeria Limited, where we provide solar power irrigation systems and micro irrigation kits for smallholder farmers and large-scale farmers in Nigeria. And we are so excited to be partnering with YSDC, the Youth Sustainability Conference, and Saving the Earth Initiative to implement this solar power irrigation system for farmers in the Bay Area in Lagos, Nigeria. And with this solution, this set of farmers will be able to have constant access to water, which is cleaner, cheaper, and more sustainable, to help them increase their productivity, reduce their cost of production, and ensure all-round production of their crops throughout the year. And we hope to improve their income and livelihood through this project.
My name is Saeed Adams. I am a farmer, I am an agribusiness coach, and also a sustainability enthusiast. As farmers, we've been having serious challenges around having constant water supply for our fruits and vegetables. Yes, we grow extensively our fruits and vegetables, and these crops require constant water. We are hoping that this partnership will extend further than just irrigation and move into something that we can be proud of as we sojourn in our production.
I am Damilola Amid Balogun, and then in a time like this, it is of utmost importance that we put youth at the center of sustainable development. And as our organization stands, the Youth Sustainable Development Network, we organize our annual conference where we do not only educate youth on sustainable development, but also get them to brainstorm, to come up with practical ideas, and so these ideas can be implemented. And so this is one major stand for us, especially in the decade of action. This whole idea started from the conference, and then at the end of the day, we were able to get funding through our partners, Panther Group, to actually execute this project in collaboration with Irritech Nigeria and also the emerging Saving the Earth organization. So we would all use this opportunity to urge every stakeholder out there to make sure to support to the cause of ensuring that we build a sustainable environment and a great and impactful world.
As SA Farm is concerned, no more generator. If I generator for sale, you get person to buy generator.
Wow, that was an absolutely fantastic video, Demi. I love seeing you on there. That's amazing. Amazing work being done. And I apologize for the misstep in the procedure. Thank you for that video. Next, we will hear from Miss Julia Bonetti. Julia was appointed to the 2021 McKinsey Next Generation Women's Leaders and also served as a volunteer editor-in-chief under the United Nations Environment Program. Like Dami, Julia was a COP26 contributor and remains strongly committed to climate issues. Now, we will be sharing Julia's address with you today as a pre-recorded video. Please give it your full attention.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today to share my experience and to discuss together the road to COP27. My name is Giulia Bonetti. I am a member of Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, the Brussels branch, and I've also been a United Nations volunteer for over 3 years. I am in fact editor-in-chief at UVS, Universal Versatile Society, which is an organization accredited under the United Nations Environment Program that focuses on climate change awareness and education. We have a YouTube channel that reports on weekly news about climate change. And it is thanks to this role under the United Nations Environment Program as a volunteer that I had the possibility to take part to COP26 last year in Glasgow. I participated as an observer, but I also had the honor to be able to step up in the stage of the conference and to talk about our communication strategy. We in fact follow what we like to call a minimalistic approach. What we do in this channel is essentially to take complex or scientific news on climate change and re-elaborate them so that a non-technical audience, so somebody that does not work in climate change mitigation, can understand them and be up to date with the latest developments. So what we do is essentially to digest this news, but we are minimalistic also in our tone, not only the content. And what I mean by this is that during the last years, we noticed that the communication around climate change had very intense tones, was very alarmist. And we think that this anesthetizes the audience and in some cases, even worse, makes the audience feel discouraged. When people hear about the news on climate change, which are of course very dramatic, they think, how can I make a contribution? How can I mitigate this issue, which is so big and so dramatic? So what we try to do is exactly the contrary as volunteers, as activists on climate change mitigation. What we want is for the people and for the audience to feel empowered and to take actions and to feel like they can really make a difference. So we try to be minimalistic also in the way that in which we deliver the news and to be clear, to the point, and also to be proactive in proposing solutions. Of course, expressing this concept at COP26 was really an honor, and it was overall an amazing experience. It was really rich of inputs and things to be considered, but if I had to single out one singular aspect that really surprised me, I think it would be that I was really expecting a scientific or technical debate because, of course, there are some scientific and technological challenges that are linked to the mitigation measures to climate change. But instead, I was surprised to see that the social dimension really played a big role during the discussions around mitigation measures. And I heard a lot the concept of empathy and of human sustainability. Now, this, in my opinion, is a cultural change, which was due, but also is very smart. And it's very smart because, of course, when we think about solutions, about mitigation measures, and we want them to be adopted at a large scale or in the medium or even long term, it's very important that such solutions are viable for the people that need to implement them. So for sure, looking towards COP27, I think that governments, private sector entities, NGO, youth, migrant advocates, and other relevant stakeholders should keep focusing on the social dimension of climate change. And this is because really climate change is not seen now. We realize now that it's not just a scientific or environmental issue, but it's also a social issue. The United Nations Development Program defined climate change as the defining human development issue of our generation. And of course, we need to take into account the sustainability and the concreteness of the solution that we're trying to suggest. And go back to the concept I heard at COP26 of human sustainability and really think about how we can implement it in a concrete way. unfortunately, there is another thing that I will think will be an object of discussion, which of course was not present at COP26 and that needs swift action, which is the war in Ukraine and more in general wars overall together, but for sure now they are in the spotlight even more because we know that climate change mitigation is vastly an energy challenge and further consideration should be given to the energy mix that we have while we undergo the transition to cleaner energy sources and of course to its geopolitical implications. Of course, besides the fact and the amendments to the previous pact that are generated during the COP conferences, I think that extremely important and fundamental are the side agreements that are born during these conferences. For example, at COP26, there was a bilateral agreement between China and the US. As we know, they are two major players in the scene of climate change strategies or discussions. And this produced the US-China joint Glasgow Declaration on enhancing climate actions in the 2020s. I believe that, of course, Asia-Pacific will play a key role in these discussions because it is a region that is evolving rapidly and that it surely has the gravitas, the weight to change the outcomes of the discussion on climate change mitigation. And I really hope that Asia-Pacific region will be a leader and swing the decision in the right direction and really lead by example in the actions in climate change mitigation. If I had to think of examples of initiatives that I find inspiring and that I took part to, that I think are sort of really strong ways to be involved in climate change mitigation, I would think about, for example, the Climate Reality Project. The Climate Reality Project is founded and chaired by Nobel laureate and former US Vice President Al Gore. And of course, the aim is to empower people everywhere with the knowledge and tools to create a sustainable future, and in particular, as the title suggests, to catalyze a planet-wide shift to clean energy and to solve climate change. So why do I think that this program is good? Three things that I find in all my activities are extremely important. First, it's volunteering. It's based on a voluntary basis, and this allows people to be immediately active, so to be involved in climate change actions and mitigation measures. Second of all, they provide training. So of course, it is really important for people to be knowledgeable. They provide information and they also provide workshops and they help you find creative solutions. And third, the network. In my experience, it's really, really important to talk to people, to gather suggestions, and to create a community to multiply the impact. And these three aspects are all equally important. So the action that you can immediately have, the information and training that you receive, and the network that you have, because even though they're different dimensions, they all contribute towards one goal. So to make you a better activist, a better volunteer, and somebody who really is empowered and can have an impact. Because of course, you need to be as articulate as the problem you're trying to solve. In this case, climate change, which we know has many aspects. And I'm happy to say that another association that does these three things very well is in fact Young Professionals in Foreign Policy. And it is what we are just doing here right now, today, all together.
Thank you to Julia for her presentation. I'm quite excited that she mentioned Climate Reality, as I'm a Climate Reality alumni myself from 2 years ago, and I can attest that it is a wonderful program. I think we can all agree that taking even small steps in creating positive change can make a big difference in supporting and empowering others, especially young people. Now I will introduce our final speaker, Mr. Zihan Shin. Served as a COP26 Global Youth Statement co-lead with the youth constituency of the UNFCCC. Zihan is also a leader in our regional youth partner organization, MYCP. Zihan, welcome back. And we are happy to have you with us here again. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and very happy to be back. I would just share my screen, so if you can give me one moment. I hope you can see my screen, and very good morning to everyone here from London, and good evening if you're in Japan. It's an honor to be invited to speak at this distinguished panel today. Before I start, I'd just like to extend my gratitude again to Lauren and YPFP Tokyo for organizing this meaningful panel, to Tristan for the very warm welcome, as well as to my fellow speakers, Demi and Julia, for a very insightful speech, which I personally learned a lot from. To introduce myself, my name is Zihan, and I was the COP26 Global Youth Statement co-lead in 2021. In addition to that, I serve a few additional roles at MYCP and MJCY, as well as at UCL, where I currently study. Before I provide some of my thoughts on the topic, I would like to begin, if possible, by sharing some context behind my personal involvement in youth climate advocacy. Having grown up in and lived, traveled across many Asian coastline cities, I was sensitized to the nature and the challenges of climate change on urban development since I was very young. To give you a concrete example, you can see on this slide the visual impact of a 3-degree temperature rise on water levels in Shanghai, one of these, or in fact, the city that's most vulnerable to climate change and rising sea levels in Asia Pacific. The extent to which the city may be submerged underwater, as you can see on the screen, marked by the blue colors. And the significant population displacement that this entails really struck me when I was young. And it is with this personal connection to the climate crisis that first motivated me to get involved. Today, I like to perhaps split my presentation into 3 parts: the global youth voice at COP26, and a personal evaluation of COP26 outcomes, speaking on my personal capacity, and preparing for COP27. So at COP26 in Glasgow last year, as my fellow speakers have very eloquently introduced, the world came together to address this issue of climate change after COP26 has been postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I had the privilege of representing the Global Youth Voice at the Youth Headline event, and alongside many of my passionate colleagues from UNFCCC Youth, we presented the Global Youth Statement to high-level dignitaries in climate governance. On the picture, for example, you can see COP26 President Alok Sharma and the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Patricia Espinosa, among many others. So what exactly is the COP26 Global Youth Statement to begin with? For context, this Global Youth Statement was a 78-page document, so somewhat long, that seeks to essentially represent youth climate policy demands across 15 different themes, including, but not limited to, climate finance, energy, sustainable cities, and climate justice. This Global Youth Statement was also drafted in consultation with more than 40,000 young people from more than 135 countries around the world, including with many young people across Asia Pacific. Overall, our overarching demand from this statement was for meaningful youth engagement at all levels of climate governance and decision-making processes, in line with the notion of intergenerational equity. So through the GYS, which you can actually scan to read on this slide here with the QR code, we have really advocated for the expertise and the dedication of young people around climate action around the world. It is also our hope that by presenting a unified document to climate policymakers and negotiators, future COPs like COP27 this year will build on the progress and momentum provided by the GYS to further the impact of the youth climate movement. Going forward, one of the most interesting and constructive learning experiences that I had in lobbying climate negotiators and other stakeholders at COP was some of these following points. Without going too much into detail, I think that exerting meaningful influence for young people at such a high-level conference like COP requires a unique combination of different skills and knowledge, including the agenda-setting ability, representative power and mandate, climate expertise and knowledge, as well as a strategic understanding and awareness of the power of coalitions. And I think that, to me personally, learning these skills and actually putting them into practice meant the difference between youth representation and youth impact, and the difference between having a seat at the table and being able to use this seat to influence for change. So beyond the Global Youth Statement, what a lot of my colleagues at UNFCCC Youth also did was to strive to incorporate meaningful youth engagement in the Glasgow Climate Pact, which is the eventual outcome of the COP26. Personally, my team was especially grateful to many European youth climate negotiators for inspiring change from within their national party delegations. And perhaps just to clarify, COP26 participants were there in various roles. For example, just now, Dami was sharing about his role representing his NGO. And essentially, we worked extensively with these NGOs representatives, but also with youth climate negotiators as part of national delegations to inspire change. And here you can see some of our photos in collaborating with these young leaders at COP26. I think moving to the final part of my presentation, the ultimate question that everybody is seeking to address is whether Glasgow delivered on what Paris promised. And I think that on this topic, in my personal opinion, the Glasgow Climate Pact has actually succeeded significantly in terms of updating the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, in a more ambitious and equitable decision. It finalized Article 6 and Paris rubric, which is meant to facilitate the trading of the carbon trading. And it also accelerated net zero commitments around the world. And as Julia mentioned, it created the basis for multilateral cooperation, including US-China, one of the most significant partnerships in climate action. And nonetheless, I think it has been suggested that much else remains unresolved. And a lot of these topics definitely will be picked up at COP27. For example, the topics of phasing down or out fossil fuels, as well as the idea of loss and damage for the most affected areas and people, remain controversial. In addition, there are also hidden challenges that are perhaps not on the COP agenda that are equally important to address. For example, food systems and inclusive participation, both of which deserve our attention. It is worth repeating, however cliche, that in order to reach the goal of 1.5, which is the main aim of the Paris Agreement, much more systematic and radical action is required, as the world is currently on course to a temperature rise much higher. And in light of these challenges, and with my final slide, I'd like to share a concrete engagement that I've recently begun with the newly created platform Unify, which stands for the United Nations International Federation of Youth for Water and Climate. Through this youth platform, we aim to convene young people from all walks of life to address the water-climate nexus and to support the Water and Climate Coalition convened by 9 UN agencies. As one of the East Asia and Southeast Asia focal points, I'm also very happy to discuss this opportunity further with anyone here today if you may be interested. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation and hope that it has provided some food for thought. And thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to taking this discussion even further on this very fruitful, but also, I suppose, very challenging road to COP27. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and reflections with us today, Jihan. And I'm glad you shared about the new initiative and talked a little bit about the Glasgow Climate Pact. I actually have it right here in front of me, and the work that has been done is really quite remarkable. So you've given us a lot of beneficial points to consider both now and for the future. So all of our speakers today have weighed in on how climate, an issue how critical an issue our changing climate reality is, perhaps for youth more than any others. Young people will inherit the world of the future, no matter what condition our predecessors leave it in. And it's vital that the leaders of tomorrow be prepared and empowered to step into their roles as leaders. And that means that young people must be included at the decision-making tables. Now, there is much that we can learn from our panelists today about leaning in and providing a voice for young people. And we'll now take some time for a Q&A session. Now, if you have a question for any of our speakers, please write it in the chat in either Japanese or English, and we will get to you and voice the question. So as we wait for questions to come into the chat, I have a question that I would like to ask Demi and Jihan. How would you say we can facilitate greater collaboration between young people from different backgrounds and sectors in order to accelerate climate action? Zihan, if you would like to start first.
Definitely. And thank you so much for the question. I think this question is really important because it highlights and underscores the point of the importance of collaboration in addressing the climate crisis. When I was there at COP26 and in general throughout my climate action journey, we see the contributions that each young person, in fact, each person can make in their very own capacities. I think it's very important, for example, if you're at COP26, to see the extent to which different sectors and different countries are involved in their own ways in addressing climate action. One of the experiences that stood out to me at COP26 was the fact that a lot of countries in their national pavilions were actually highlighting the different climate solutions that work in their context, but also some best practices that can be applied across countries and national contexts. And in addition to that, what is also very important is for us to engage the private sector, which remains crucial, not only as an engine of growth, but also as a provider of solutions, for example, in the realm of climate technology or climate finance, which will help us accelerate our efforts towards climate action. And I think for young people here, and this is something that I'm happy to touch on and discuss further, it is really important to also find your niche in your own climate action journey and see how you can leverage your own unique talents, backgrounds, and expertise to contribute to this fight. Whether or not you are in the private sector, in government, in civil society, I think it is important that we all contribute to this fight in our own ways. And I think that our resources, and collaborations such as the one that YPFP is currently organizing provides a great platform for us to kickstart some of these collaborations. And I'm hoping that, with this dialogue and going forward, we're able to talk to other people about this climate crisis and find unique ways to collaborate despite our differences. And in fact, precisely because of our differences in backgrounds, expertise, and knowledge.
Thank you very much, Zihan. I like the aspect of sort of local context being upgraded to regional and national context, particularly with like best practices. I think that would be very good for climate adaptation, resilience building, and people finding their own niches is very welcoming. Demi, do you have some answer that you would like to give for this question?
All right, thank you very much for the question. And just like Zihan said, he basically touched on every part. But what I would just like to add is that it is important to understand the character and the spirit of time that we exist in. It is with no doubt that globalization continues to ease the free flow of persons and goods and services. So how do we intend to leverage all this towards a climate action agenda? So just like Zihan said again, it is important that we take note as individuals, what are our talents? Looking at this from the angle of individuals, beyond research, beyond policy recommendation, beyond advocacy, it is also important that as young people, we begin to implement solutions in our own little space. So as a group of young people present here, it is important you begin to look at what aspect you really want to drive down this global action. So are you very good at advocacy? How can you drive down climate action through advocacy? Are you very good with research and policy recommendation? How can you leverage that to drive towards a net zero by 2050? Whatever you're good at, communicate. Are you an artist? Do you sing? Do you draw? Whatever you do, just leverage all of this thing that wouldn't even be of so much stress for you. leverage it such that people are aware of this thing, because when we know better, we do better. So in as much as it is important that we create awareness, it is also important as young people, just like the video I played earlier on, begin to take actions in local communities, come together, share your proposition, give your value, show what you intend to do, and then look for how you can really seek to partner with private sector, because at the end of the day, the art of the SDG really lies in partnership. So how do you want to partner with local communities? How do you want to partner with private sector? How do you want to involve public sector? I mean, the conglomeration of all of these entities together and bringing it down in your own local community, which at the end of the day would help to accelerate a global impact that we currently seek, is the way forward. So that would just be my only two contribution to that question. Thank you very much for the question again.
Well, that was a wonderful answer, Demi. I'm feeling quite inspired already. Leveraging strengths and passions and experiences and voices, networks, communities, and partnerships, pretty much everything you do each day could have one impact on doing climate action. I think that's pretty inspirational. But as climate activists yourself, climate change can be very psychologically distressing to youth mental health and well-being, not only for activists, but for everyday people. In the youth unit at UNDESA, we were concerned by the long-term impact of the climate crisis on young people and future generations. Climate anxiety and dissatisfaction with government responses in children and young adults is widespread, and I imagine it's very widespread, even within climate negotiations themselves. With a recent Lancet study finding that 75% of youth respondents believe that the future is frightening, and the idea of eco-anxiety and climate depression is indeed rising. So if I might ask, and forgive me if this is much of a personal question, but what are some ways in which climate change has impacted youth mental health and well-being? And how can we best promote better youth mental health and well-being climate action? Because the actions taken for climate change will be a long, lifelong journey. Let's see. Jihan, if we could start first with you, and then we will go next to Demi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is indeed a very important question to address on the issue of eco-anxiety. I think, first of all, I think eco-anxiety is definitely real, it's tangible, and it's something that we should recognize that affects young people and future generations disproportionately. I think we can only start to address this problem of eco-anxiety when we are able to see how it has impacted us and then see how we can move forward from there. One of the ways in which we at YoungGo, but in general across the youth climate movement, are doing is essentially to recognize the contributions that different people in the youth climate movement have been making, and to recognize their efforts, but also to make sure that their efforts complement each other. We know, of course, that the youth climate movement consists of a coalition of actors, including young people involved in advocacy, in campaigning and protests, in government and policy, as well as in private sector and ESG. And I think on the topic of mental health and eco-anxiety, it is very important, in my opinion, to not let the perfect stand in the way of the good, and to recognize the importance of small steps that people take every day in order to address this. Whether it's making small changes in your lifestyle, incremental changes in your lifestyle that will gradually accumulate and snowball into, greater change. Even things like changing your diet, changing your travel and transportation habits. All these changes in your lifestyle can make a huge difference, and they will also enhance your personal development and empower you to make a difference going forward. And I think if we were to truly address this issue of eco-anxiety, we definitely need to recognize the impact that it has, but also we need to start and we need to continue the momentum in strengthening each other in this movement, in this fight, recognizing that we are not alone in this space and that we are not the only ones to be affected, and that this is a global fight. And that if we have each other and we recognize each other as partners of change, then it's more likely, and in fact, I believe that it is possible for us to attain the goal that we all wish to attain.
Excellent. Thank you for that statement, Zihan. I noticed in the report that you had co-authored that they had a small section on youth mental health. There's a very small section that could be further elaborated on in future talks whenever producing youth statements. I think it's quite critical because the reality of it, we're having to deal with both the COVID-19 pandemic on top of an ongoing climate crisis, and that is quite a lot of a toll on mental health. And I also enjoyed the idea of small steps leading to big beginnings. Dami, do you have anything else that you would like to contribute to this question as well?
All right, thank you very much again. So for me, I just want to emphasize that eco-anxiety is one of the major effects no one is even talking about. And that's just one of the effects of climate change. So when you talk of climate change, everybody thinks, okay, yes, we have to limit global warming. We have to accelerate our steps towards net zero. We have to decarbonize. And so we have to understand that all of these things have they have bigger problems that they come with, which one of it is eco-anxiety. And so this one also in my presentation, I emphasized that the climate reality of several locations actually differs. And so in my own location, this is something that is relatively low when compared to the issue of dealing with socioeconomic developments. And so it is important that all of these things have to be prioritized. We understand that the generation before us have not prioritized young people's mental health. And so as young people that we are successfully and working towards building the future that we want, we begin to table all of these conversations within high-level dialogue in our own little space. And I like that Zihan said, oh yeah, they were able to address it in a report. So these are like little steps that we need to harness together to make sure that the climate reality of every location and every region is recognized. And so we are able to deal with all of these things adequately, and we're able to propose solutions in accordance to every regional need, which at the end of the day will bring us to the larger goal, which is to reduce the impact of climate change in the world at large. Thank you very much.
Access to education, access to healthcare, and having all of those things that make a life worth living and enjoyable. And those will also be essential in addressing climate change. Now, thank you to all of our distinguished speakers and guests for sharing your time and input with us on this critical issue of COP27 and young people. And thank you for joining our panel on youth leaders and the environment on the road to COP27. We appreciate hearing from Dami, Julia, and Zihan. Through our dialogue today, we are reminded that there is more to learn and more voices to include and more to develop and grow on this future topic. So we thank you all for your participation in today's event and invite you to take 2 minutes to complete a survey to share your feedback. And you can find the link to the survey in the chat. So as we bring our event to a close, I would like to extend an invitation to all of you to remain in touch with YPFP Tokyo and consider joining us as a YPFP Tokyo member at our future events. To find out more, please scan the QR code on the screen or contact our membership director, Charlie, at the email address provided. So in closing, I would like to emphasize that investing in youth yields a triple benefit. First, improvements in the now. Second, continued benefits throughout adulthood. And third, positive developments carried forward into the next generation. I would also like to argue that supporting youth professionals interested in foreign policy adds a fourth dimension of returns, and that of cross-border development and diplomatic growth. So I hope that all of you will continue to be part of our work going forward. And thank you for your time and enjoy your weekend. Goodbye. And thank you to all of our speakers as well. It's very lovely meeting you.
Thank you so much.
Of course.